Welcome to the new and improved ConfigureITDone Podcast. The ConfigureITDone Podcast is now a place where we interview senior thought leaders in the SAP space across Australia and New Zealand, and the aim is to tap into their knowledge so we can pass on their insights to the listening SAP community. Please subscribe to the podcast and like, share and comment across Castos, YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to donate to the cause, please click the link below.
Welcome back to the ConfigureITDone Podcast. I just want to say a massive thank you to all the listeners of the ConfigureITDone Podcast. We're getting some fantastic feedback, and please keep it coming as well. Whether it's good feedback, bad feedback, we are all ears, so please do let us know. Please also like, share, and subscribe across YouTube, Castos, Apple Music, and Spotify as well. Now, in today's podcast, we're very lucky to have a 30-year experienced program director. He's managed multiple transformations, many ERP implementations, and he's going to be focused on one specific area, and that specific area is project governance. Why these major programs go wrong, and also how to improve project governance as well. So please listen to the podcast, and like I said, give us your feedback. This is Chris Gebbie. Season 7, Episode 2 of the ConfigureITDone Podcast, and my colleague Bethany is back, and you've brought along a great guest.
I have. So Chris Gebbie is an amazing program director based here in Melbourne. So he's got 30 years of experience doing ERP transformation programs. He's someone that we've placed before and known for years, and he's brilliant at what he does.
I feel like the odd one out today, both being in Melbourne and I'm in Sydney. But lovely to have you, Chris.
How it feels. Me off on my own in Melbourne.
Yeah, and thanks, Bethany, for the introduction.
Definitely. And Chris is going to be discussing project governance with us today, which is really exciting because this is one of every other podcast that we've done. I have a good amount of background in, but with project governance, I am just ready to learn from you because you're brilliant at it. So on that note, so this is something that you've been doing, like I said, over your last 30 years of working with ERP and primarily SAP programs. So one thing we wanted to ask you about is, after your experience with all these different projects, what are some of the keys for successful implementation and avoiding those kind of poorly quoted or rather poorly done projects that we see sometimes in SAP?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of well-known factors. Bethany, I think, and I listened to some of the previous podcasts on here, which have been fantastic. I've actually really enjoyed sort of going through them and different perspectives, but a lot of them have talked about the same things, and consistent, and they're really important. Change management, scope management, the attention to data quality is really critical, and how poor quality and the impacts of that. But certainly project management disciplines, I think people sort of touch on that, but that's actually really essential as well. But I want to focus, and when we're talking about this, I really want to focus on project governance because I think it's an area that really hasn't been addressed enough. And I still think there's an issue, and I think that, when I think about, when I talk to people, and I've gone into a lot of reviews, when I've talked to executives and so forth, there's still a certain immaturity. There's certainly, a lack of knowledge about these projects, after all these years. As I said, 30 years, I started in the early 90s, and there was an excuse because it was all new. No one really knew anything back then. But 30 years experience, there should be a better level of knowledge, I think. And so I think there's an issue with governance that I think we need to address.
Sure. So what would be your specific experience around project governance then, Chris? I know you've done multiple ERP implementations and other projects, but what would be your specific experience?
Look, I think everyone would say it's very mixed, really, at this stage. And that's not to say that all projects are bad. And I see a lot of these articles about 75% of projects fail. I don't buy into that. I don't think it's like that. I think that there are a lot of really good projects out there. They're actually really deliver. But there's a certain persistency about some poorly governed projects that fail to deliver as expected. They mightn't completely fail, but they go in and they're really underwhelming. and companies are really, frustrated then with a whole lot of stabilization to stabilize them. I got an interest in this area. There was a project back in 2004. It was around the customs project. I don't know if you remember it, but basically this thing had started in the late 90s. They wanted to build the project. It was for all the incoming and outcoming freight. It went in, it was so bad that the ships couldn't get into the docks. And the reason they couldn't get in because the ships in the docks couldn't get the freight off them. And the system actually brought everything to a standstill. It was appalling. It had a budget originally of $30 million. The final amount after an audit was $213 million. Wow. So 7 times the original number. And the minister the point about governance is the minister was asked in charge of this area of customs, was asked by the press, so what happened? He said, well, it's an IT project. What do you expect? And the press said, yeah, what do you expect?
Wow.
And I can still remember having my breakfast, almost choking on reading that and thinking, how do they get away with this sort of nonsense? And so you think about one of the biggest complaints about executives make about projects, and as I said, I've done reviews, they complain about, projects going wrong. And they said, why do I find out now? So executives expect to have problems. What they get frustrated with is it takes so long to find out. And of course, as we all know, the longer it takes to find out something, the harder it is and the more expensive it is to fix. So that, if you wait 6 months on a problem, your only choices are bad and really bad. And this is where they get frustrated. So I think there's a governance. So, and the other thing is I've found with governance, and I suppose focused on steering committees, is that the people on them are typically executives, but they're actually quite successful. So they're successful, they're smart at what they do. But if I think back to a lot of the executive steering committees, half the people on the steering committees, without being sort of put it out there, half of them don't really make a contribution that I would expect for someone at that level. It's the best way. And I've checked that with a lot of other project directors, and they say that's true. There's a lot of people on steering committees in senior levels who come on, and I think it's just they don't know. They really don't actually understand what's actually required here. So if they're not, which means they're not engaged, and the problem with that is they're not engaged, then they're not fully involved. And they are the key people, typically, if the executive, who need to be involved in change management and business readiness. So if they're not engaged, that means it's going to have an impact on their work around business readiness and change management, and that's going to impact on the actual project. And I think if I look at steering committees and I look at another area of governance, which is board of directors, and they actually play a very similar role. When I looked at the Australian, ASIC have a list of sort of the responsibilities of directors. I looked at that. If you took out the word entity and put in project, took out CEO and put in project manager, and you took out the director and you put in the steering committee, members, most of those responsibilities are almost identical. Mm-hmm. And I think about that is that the steering committee should be at that sort of level that company directors are at.
That's really interesting. That actually brings me to my next question then, which is I want to see your thoughts on how we actually improve this, but how would you define project governance? Because if there's steering committees that likely don't even fully understand what it is, what would be like a simple definition of project governance?
I think that so the governance is similar to like a director's. You're not there to second guess the project. You're not there to actually take over. If directors don't take over the operation, but they're there to actually to provide some critical, insights and thoughts, and actually to ask the right sort of questions about how is the company performing. The steering committee needs to be doing the same thing. It needs to be asking those incisive questions, is truly understanding how the actual project's going. And I think to do that, they need a certain level of education. I was a director on my daughter's school that since left school, but I was actually chairman of the board there for about 5 years, and I joined the AICD, so Australian Institute of Company Directors, and they have an amazing amount of education to really lift the quality of the directors. There's nothing out there for steering committees. So people come on to this saying, well, I've got to govern, but don't truly understand, what they need to, what are the sort of questions they need to ask at this stage. And I don't think the education is to make them a project manager. So it's not to make you a project manager and then start second guessing. It's to give them some insights into sort of key areas for them to actually start to think about the sort of questions they actually need to ask.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, just on that, how do you see this space improving? Or how do you see project governance improving?
I think there needs to be a lot more thought. I think there's a lot more education, required. I think, I started to do it on a few projects where I started to have some conversations with some of the steering committee members and starting to bring them up to speed about some of the things around projects and what they need to be actually looking for. So a couple of things, maybe I'll just run through a few and it stopped me, because there's some key areas I want to cover, but there's one around the fear factor. So there's a lot of senior execs don't like these projects because of their bad reputation. The big ERP projects. So I had a CEO years ago who complained bitterly about the project. So he was a Australian subsidiary to an overseas company. And he said, why did it have to happen on my watch? I hated this. I was trying to avoid it and now I'm stuck with it. And
it's understandable. Yeah.
It is, because of the things. So, but that's like the perfect storm. I don't know if you remember the film, The Perfect Storm. So there was a film about it. 3 storm, a major storm, patterns all merged into one off the east coast of Canada and actually killed a number of people as a result. But the thing about that, it's like critical accidents at work, they happen because many things go wrong, not one thing goes wrong. So if all the key aspects around a project, the key items, scope, change, data, change management, all that, if you fundamentally get most of those right, one of them might go wrong. And look, no project's perfect and none of mine have been perfect. There's always something that doesn't go quite right. But if only one goes wrong, you're not going to have a major accident. You're not going to have a major failure. So if you can focus on one of the key and understand what they are and what's important about them, yes, you might get 1 or 2 wrong, but it's not going to cause a major accident. So that's the first thing is stop, looking at this in fear. One is
being avoidant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the other key things around, governance, and when I should say governance, there's the steering committee, but there's also process governance, data governance. So there's a number of different factors. And I'm honing in on steering committee because it is such a key one, really, around the governance. And I think about change. So the thing around change management these days is a big push around it's leader-led change. So it's got to be led. Change is about leadership. So the leaders have to lead the change. So they have to actually communicate, and that doesn't mean that the projects doesn't have to do anything in that. It means the project has to provide all that material and the content and everything, talk to the leaders who then go out and actually talk to their part of the organization and talk about what the change is and why it's actually important and actually visibly support the actual change. So
and that's why addressing the fear factor is kind of step one, because you can't lead from the front or lead from the top if everybody's avoiding the big scary ERP project in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So you're trying to get them to a level that they're sort of reasonably comfortable where they can and they actually embrace the idea and the opportunities that the actual project, provides at that stage. The other thing is around, which touches on communications and about how important it is around communications. And there used to be, when we first started these projects, there was the Machiavelli quote that was actually mentioned, so often with the projects. And I'm not going to repeat the whole thing, but Machiavelli, who well known as go back to Renaissance, but he said that there's nothing more difficult than trying to implement change. And he said, because for the people who gain by the change, they're lukewarm in support, but the people who are actually going to lose by the change are extremely vocal and will fight to avoid it and will fight to actually defeat it at this stage. And I think that the way you address some of that concern is communication. You've got to not withdraw. It's in fact to try and embrace that, is to get out there and actually communicate. And people will come from, in terms of a project and the changes it's going to bring, it could be a whole number of things. It may impact somebody, it may not. It may impact the area. But I think the more you communicate about what the real change is, so what are the facts about the change, it is actually fundamental. And then you have a chance to really bring people along, as they say, on their overall journey. The other thing around project success is there's such a focus on time and cost, but that's what I call there's an efficiency aspect to a project. So, and that's really the time and cost. You don't want that to blow out, but also there's another aspect that they need to consider about what's the effectiveness of it, which is, am I going to get the benefits of this? what are the KPIs going to look like after I go live? Are they going to be at a minimum what I get now? Ideally, they should be improved, and where are they going to be improved? And that's what they need to be thinking. They need to be coming back, circling back the project team. Explain to me how the benefits of the KPIs, given the solution you've actually said you've designed, is actually going to deliver those benefits. Talk me through how that actually looks, and hold them accountable as well. Yes, the time and the cost is always going to. So I think that's important. Talk around status reporting. So it's interesting on status reporting. It's really, there's often a lack of consistency in the reporting. So you think about what goes to the board of directors. I guarantee you those reports look the same, board meeting after board meeting after board meeting. It's a month after month. They can line them up, and actually they can see the trend. On a lot of projects that I've gone in and done the reviews, the reports change every steering committee, and it's all different.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's then hard to see a trend. It's hard to actually pick up what happens. So, something might look okay using one type of report, and then the next time there's a different type of report to try and, put it in the best possible light. It's hard to compare. So you can't see the actual, the change. You can't see the trend at this stage. And the other thing is just the sheer volume. So I previously did a review of a project, lessons learned. They were delivering steering committee packs of 100 slides. So over 100 slides. And they
would lose everybody's attention. There's no way to pay attention to
it was dumped on the executives in the morning. The meeting was in the afternoon. So I don't know what your experience of executives is, but their diary tends to be pretty full.
So an executive summary is for as well. Like we need.
That's right. Exactly. How much time are they going to have to go through 100 slides? And even if there's a few, it's just pointless. And I think back, I keep coming back to directors, but there was a famous case years ago called the Centro case. And it was essentially where finance company, they had, there were financial statements that were incorrect, and the directors didn't pick it up. And ATSIC actually took them to court and sued them because it was in 2007, and in 2008, the GFC hit, and it's caused some extreme difficulty for the actual company. And people got caught out. They'd invested in the company and got caught out because the statements were wrong. And they sued. And the judge said his expectation of directors is they have a certain amount of financial literacy if they're on the board. And they should have that. And they ultimately are the people responsible. They can't rely on the auditors. They're the ones who are actually responsible. And I think there was an article by the head of ATSIC, the original chairman of ATSIC, who wrote an article. He said, and one of the things that really struck me, he said, at the end of the day, the directors have the ability to ask for the information they need to do their job. And it's the same on the steering committee. If they don't understand, and I think a lot of them don't understand, if they don't understand, they should be saying, I don't understand this, Chris. You're going to have to either give me some more information or put it in format. I understand. I have a right as on the governance committee to be given information that helps me form an opinion. And I think that's, and again, I want to come back, that's again, talk to steering committee. You should be asking. If you don't understand, you should ask for it. But I think there's a certain reluctance, they don't want to be seen as they don't really know, that much at this stage. And IT is a classic for using terms and language that disenfranchises people from outside IT. People have no idea. I talk to my wife about my job, and she says, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Nod and listen and be supportive.
That's right, Jess. The only thing she really knows about is go live dates, and that's about it.
and then she knows that when you come home, it's either going to be like everything's fantastic or you're really stressed. You never know.
Exactly. Yeah. So look, there are lots of other things I could go through, but you get the idea. There are there's probably about 20 different items. Sort of take them through, and trying to explain about the sort of questions they should be asking. In these sort of meetings, and they have a lot more power than they actually think they do.
So what I'm hearing as an overall theme here is there is a sense of avoidance because sometimes things are either too complicated or there's just fear that they will be. And then it also seems like there's an avoidance, not just because of fear, but because the basics aren't maybe being covered because they're boring. They're not as sexy to do. Yeah. And the basics when they're missed is what causes projects to to go, like you said, from what was it, 25-30 million to 230 million, and it's just like fear and basics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no one asked the right questions. And on that customs project, there were some well-known IT companies involved in that project. Hard to believe they didn't understand what was going on, and no one raised a question. So it does. Yeah, but look, there are lots of things.
So what I'm keen to learn, Chris, obviously you've gone through multiple improvements there. Like, how would that affect the people side or the human capital side of the project?
Yeah, that's a good, actually really good point. I think the thing I start with on any project is culture. And so I think about, the number of different entities involved in a project. So, you've got it used to be just one SI partner. Now you might have multiple SI partners. Yep. One of them might be based, overseas. Largely the team is based overseas. So you've got, different countries, different companies, all with their own culture, maybe some independent contractors, maybe business people who haven't worked on projects, and even on really large organizations, you can have cultures within, companies themselves. So you bring them all together. Yeah. You've got to try and create that one culture. There was on the previous podcast from SA Power Networks, it was terrific. He talked about that, the need to set up a one-team culture. And that's actually really important. That's where I think the steering committee should be asking those sort of questions about what is the culture? How is the team gelling? You put all these people together, which is not natural, and they're under a time pressure even more, which is not natural. So how are they actually gelling? The sort of things they should be asking. Sure. You think about the project manager. I guarantee you that a new CEO wouldn't be appointed without being interviewed by at least the chairman of the board and also, some of the directors, that they would want to know who it is. I think about some cases I've been interviewed by the project sponsor, mostly not. And certainly nobody else who's, no other executive at this stage, maybe the CIO have been actually interviewed.
That's a surprise, huh?
There needs to be people on this governance. They need to be actually talking, will this person fit this company? Will it fit this culture? And if it's not, then that's potentially a bit of a problem. They're probably good at sizing up people, and trying to assess them and so forth, rather just because I think if it's just the IT, they'll just assess someone from an IT background. I think you talk about, change and, being important and so forth. The steering committee brings a different perspective, which is really critical.
It's really interesting because we've had roles where it's like you've got 2 rounds of psychometric testing and all these technical questions and everything else, and it really misses the point, and it doesn't actually do its due diligence, because it's like all of that, like whether you can answer textbook questions about SAP or anything else, all of that is completely irrelevant. What really matters is what's the reputation on the project? How do you actually handle the human side of things? Because it's human beings technology affects in the first place.
People made projects,
Wrong due diligence. We need the right kind.
Just a project sponsor believe they can work with the project director or manager that's being brought onto the project. Are they comfortable working with that person? Because they're not comfortable, then that's an issue. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. The other thing is around due diligence of selected project resources, and this is an area you'd appreciate. So I had this idea is you need to understand the scope of the project in the terms of what's not old technology, what's technology that's been around for a while. And I'd ask you that the basic S4 finance has been around for some time now. And then what's some of the newer technology that's really coming out? Like, we're talking about when we're going live, we're going with some new version of something, like very different version. On the one that technology has been around for a while, you can pretty much get commodity resources. There's quite a few around, there's options. When you go to the new technology, you're looking at really specialized resources, very small pool. You want to make sure you get the best. Okay. So I have this simple theory around new technology. If you get specialized resources and know what they're doing on new tech, you're getting a leading edge technology. But if you get poor, and I've seen this, if you get poor resources, you're looking at bleeding edge. It's going to cost you a lot. And I think that's where, again, the steering committee can understand is, so this technology, like what's it like in terms of trying to find resources? It looks shiny, but are there plenty of resources? Because if there are not resources around, you're potentially on a hiding to nothing. You're going to, and it's going to hurt. So, and it's those sort of questions, obvious questions that I need to ask. And then the final one really is around business resources. So business resources work on the project full time. The steering committee needs to take responsibility to work out what happens to them at the end of the project. And I can tell you, those resources, as the project's getting towards the end, are thinking about, well, where do I go? Where do I fit in? Because someone's replaced me probably. Look, it might have been a backfill. And do I even want to go back into that role?
And then all the IP just walks out the door as soon as the project finishes.
And they have so much knowledge, that is just so important to actually utilize. They are gold, those people. So you want to actually, how do I get, I've actually invested in an asset. I've essentially developed this really good asset. How do I get the value out of that person? When the system goes, I don't want to lose that. Because as you know, when you go live, it's not like an endpoint. It's the start of then a journey where you want to continuously improve. And these people are ideal to help drive that continuous improvement. And again, I think that's where the steering committee really, I think, wants to, to get involved and try and understand what's going on.
It's a really good point. That's really interesting. Love that. I'm going to think of some questions for clients in future, actually, and how can we retain the business side? Because that's the first thing we get is as soon as a project's wrapping up, we get calls saying, okay, I want something else now.
There was a podcast, I don't know if it was the last one, but it might have been the one before that. And they were talking about this idea of, technical resources that really understood the business side of it as well, and how valuable they are. And I think that's a real key as well, is that, and they're the sort of resources that are worth their weight in gold.
That IQ piece where you hit the nail on the head, where there's a massive investment in that person. It's quite a controversial topic in the recruitment world with temp to perm, and a lot of companies at the end of a program, they want to convert contractors to permanent, which is fine. But a company almost feels that they're not obliged to pay a fee for that. It's a very controversial topic, and
it is.
It's almost like the analogy we use is like it's like renting a house, and then when you come to buy it, you don't get a discount. But won't go in.
The house is increased in value, and yet the same thing. It's like, do you want that contractor to stay there with all of that knowledge, or do you want them to walk out the door because that's going to cost you more? Like, this is an investment for future.
And those resources are so essential to change management. So, you can send out, and I've seen this time and time again, you can send out consultants who understand the system extremely well, go out and talk to, the users and so forth, how it works. And most of them say, who is this person? I don't know them. And you can send out one of these business representatives who have spent, the time on the project and understand it, the context of, the process in SAP, how it works, can go out and they might know half of what a consultant knows, but they can actually talk to people that, and they have, it's that old story about they've got street cred. They can actually engage, and they can really help get people across the line and get them actually understanding what the value of the system is in the context of the, the company's processes.
Definitely.
Chris, that was fantastic. So many good points there around the improvement piece. And around project governance. That was brilliant. What I'd love to know, and we ask this question at the end of every podcast, is who would you like to listen to on a future podcast? Yeah,
so I noticed this on previous podcasts. So a couple. So I'll actually give a couple. One is a project sponsor. And I've dealt with a few over the years. I'd like to know what they knew before a project and what they learned from a project, and almost what did they wish they'd have known at the start of a project. So, I think there's some real insights in there they can give us. And then also probably want to hear from SAP. So, and I think this was mentioned previously, what's some of the innovation around the delivery of these projects? So I know SAP is really conscious about that. What insights can they provide, around best practices of implementing SAP solutions? And maybe what's some of the technology that's available and people don't know or aren't really using, and there's some real value in actually understanding a bit more about some of the technology they provide to support these implementations. I think that'd be gold, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, you're going to be very happy, Chris, especially the latter there. We've got a number of guests from SAP that are going to come on as well. And next week, we've got the head of Sorg Summit coming on as well. And they're representing 70 CIOs. So there's some pretty hot topics on there as well. So, yeah, he'll be pretty pleased.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll listen into that one.
Excellent. All right, Chris and Bethany, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And we'll speak soon.
No worries. Thanks, bud.
Thank you.